Hi, Gabby.
Hi, Sophie. So yes, I mean, I absolutely agree with Hetty. Brilliant session. And it was so nice when Suzanne made a comment in the chat box about how nice this topic is. And she just hit the nail on the head because there is so little out there for us teachers to understand the difficulty involved in teaching spelling, whether we should even teach it. There's virtually nothing. I mean, as far as I know, and it's the very first time in my life that I'm actually part of a session about spelling. So thank you very much.
I hope there'll be many more.
Well, you see, and this I'm not so sure about. And let me just ask you the first question immediately because it links to the question. It's about, you've already mentioned this, it's about whose responsibility and whose role it is to actually teach spelling. So I think we should start by saying that not a single teacher training course, not even an initial course. I remember my Delta course. There was nothing about spelling whatsoever, not a single mention of how important it is and how it should be addressed in the classroom. So spelling really is not, it's almost like it's not regarded as an important part of a language learning. So how do you feel about this lack of emphasis on teaching and learning spelling on initial courses?
I completely agree. Gabby, it certainly wasn't part of my CELTA course. It was part of my Delta course because that's one area that I decided to look into. Right? But I even then remember the teachers thinking, you're not going to find much. You're not going to find enough a lot of stuff out there. But yes, there's nowhere near as much when it comes to resources and materials for teachers and for students when it comes to teaching spelling, especially to adults. That let's say if you're looking at teaching, receptive skills, you can find loads of stuff, developing vocabulary, loads of stuff. Spelling maybe not as much. However, I do think there's a bit more now. I do think that spelling and literacy as a whole is definitely more on the radar now. And you see more and more resources are becoming available. I think when it comes to websites in the UK, I think the Bell Foundation have answers to me, if not everything. My goodness, they can't be far off. It's definitely becoming more important. It's that been more available. It's not a major part of ELT. It's becoming that bit more. It's more prevalent in ESOL teaching.
Why, Sophie? Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think it's you can see it more in ESOL, but you can't actually see it in EFL?
That's a really good point, Gabby. I think when it comes to EFL, I think the general assumption is that students are literate and they can spell, they can read. So I think, if you think even about, the most common course books out there, they don't really look at spelling patterns very much because, again, the assumption is all your students can read and write. And chances are they'll be able to spell. They might make the odd mistake, but that's the general assumption. I think that's why it's not really part of teaching. I think as teachers, we it's on us as teachers. I think it's also on academic managers, really. I think it's the response is to provide support. So let's say if you've got a teacher that comes to you and says, look, my students are struggling with spelling. I've got no idea how to help them. Well, somebody's going to have to go home and do some homework. I think it's everybody's job, whether you're an academic manager or you're a teacher. It's one way to develop your teaching toolkit as well. I had no idea how interesting teaching spelling was until I started looking into it. It's like, where was this all along?
Yeah, I think I'm a very good panelist for you, Sophie, because until today, I have to just say it like it is. I had no interest in teaching spelling explicitly. So I'm like the 90% of EFL teachers who believe that it's on students, okay? And let me just tell you a little story from last week. One of my students was given a feedback form to fill out. And she was supposed to indicate how much she has improved in the different areas of English. And when I looked at the form, I was absolutely shocked, okay? Because she made a comment that she has improved in spelling and writing, okay? And that made me, I even said to Hedy, but Hedy, you know, I don't do any writing in class simply because they don't want to do it in class, and also because you know, they just want to speak, so the focus is elsewhere. So I do very little writing with this particular group, yet the students said, oh, I have improved in this particular area. And then I thought, I know why, okay, and I can't take credit for this. The reason why she has improved is because I give them loads of homework, controlled practice activities, right? So the boring stuff they can do at home, right? In class, we just use it in speaking. So I give them pages and pages of controlled practice activities. And what she does is she copies the whole sentence. Like most students would just fill in the gaps, right?
Yeah.
When she comes to class, her handouts are absolutely untouched, okay, new. And all her notes are in her notebook, and it's full sentences. She essentially copies every single sentence and highlights the answer. So the reason why she has improved is because she was working on it on her own. So I can't take credit for this. So this now makes me think, maybe teaching spelling really is something that students should be responsible for. And maybe the good old-fashioned way of just copying pages from a book is the way to improve, right? So how do you feel about this? Because it was quite symptomatic last week when she gave me this feedback, and I thought, right, well done, but you did it, not me. So I can't take credit for this.
Well, a couple of things, Gabby. I still think you should. If the students made progress, I still think you should take some credit. At least take some credit for it.
Not on me. It was her.
Well, do you know what? No, I still think you should take credit for it, and I'll tell you why, Gabby. I think if a student has that kind of, if she's gone home and she's done this, somehow she's been encouraged to look and to look really carefully at what she's writing and to notice. You know, to notice how words are written, to see how words are put together to form a full sentence. So I mean that she's received a bit of learner training, which really, you know, involves encouraging students to notice, you know, and I think it's about, you know, kind of instilling that sense of curiosity. You know, look at the word. What are you going to find? You know, so if you start to look at a word, what can you see inside there? Or can you find any other words in it? Do you notice any silent letters? Do you notice any double letters? Do you notice anything unusual? Do you notice any spelling patterns are similar in other words? I think helping students to improve spelling is reconnect to developing their own autonomy. They have to be curious. They have to really think, okay, well, let me look at words now. How's that word written? And I think that's why whenever we say to students, you're going to have to read and read and read. You want your spelling to improve. Read books, read books. Yes, of course, reading is always going to help, but it's really about how they should read. You know, and it's to say, look, sometimes you're better maybe reading a little bit less, but actually first read for the joy of reading. Read for the joy of understanding the story, read for the joy of understanding what you're reading, but then maybe go back and actually just start to look at the words. Do you notice anything surprising? Do you think you would have known how to spell that word? Well, test yourself, cover it and see. So I do think you should take some credit.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, I'm still refusing to take any credit for this.
You're too humble.
Yeah. Well, but but is this really what you just described? Is it really teaching spelling, or is it developing learner independence? So is it giving the students the right tools, or is it teaching spelling? Because these are two different things. I'm just trying to think of how you would actually teach spelling in class. How would you integrate it? How would you make it really explicit, considering that you have so many different students with different needs, depending on their L1, depending on whether they want to be fluent, like orally fluent, or whether they really want to. So, the more students you have, the more kind of different needs they have, right? So
of course, yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is how are you even going to teach this spelling? Are you going to, and what you think about testing spelling? Would you
Good point.
run a test only to check student spelling, and why? Because I wouldn't, you see.
Well, I think that's a brilliant question. I think, see, when it comes to teaching spelling, I think it's a combination of explicit teaching and learner training. I think learner training goes way beyond spelling. So the idea of noticing, remember that, that other workshop with with Neil, the idea of really trying to get students to become more aware of the language they use and more aware of the language they're hoping to be able to produce. So I think learner training helps with spelling, but loads of other things. The way I teach spelling is just very, very practical, and it's very integrated. So if I teach a word, spelling comes into it. If I think that there's somebody in the class who knows how to spell that word, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have the student come in and do it for me.
But let me, let me just, I need to interrupt you now, sorry, because otherwise I'll forget. You just said when you teach a new word, you teach spelling. Okay, I mean, we all know it, right? But this is part of teaching lexis. That's not teaching spelling per se. And then when you teach new lexis, obviously you review the lexis, and you kind of get students to write it on the board again and again. But there is no explicit focus on, notice the spelling regularities here or irregularities. Do you do this? Because I don't.
Well, let's say if I'm teaching a word, so let's say, as you said, it's part of teaching lexis. So, if I'm teaching, let's say, a couple of jobs, and let's say the word psychologist comes up, then we're going to have a look at the spelling. Okay, guys, how many silent letters can you identify? Can you notice any odd or any very surprising sounds coming from those letters? Yes, CH. Okay, can you think of any other word that has the CH combination with the K sound? Right. Now, it's not that it's going to take 10 minutes, out of the lesson, but it might still take a couple of minutes, but I still think it's worthwhile for everybody, because it's really about developing connections. It's about connecting something new to something you already know.
I was about to say,
and pattern. Yeah, I think it's pattern recognition as well. So have you seen that pattern before? Have you seen that in any other words? Whenever it comes to, that chart, the look, say, cover, write, and check, I would just make a note of this. Like, guys, remember, fill that in for your homework.
Yeah.
But that's something that I usually get the students to do at home. Depends. If all my students have literacy difficulties, and I might give them a few minutes in the lesson to work on their look, say, cover, write, and check. If the class has very mixed levels, and most of my classes do, I might just say to some of the students, look, remember, work on your spellings for your homework.
Yeah. You see, I'm listening to you thinking, well, actually, Gabby, you are not so bad because you do it, but I do it under the guise of teaching phonology. So I remember Monday's lesson, and it was exactly this. It was the OUGH or OUS, whatever, and the suffix it was. And so the focus is really, the explicit focus is on phonology. But then, yes, I was asking students, okay, give me more adjectives with this particular. So but you see, but I was not emphasizing the fact that, look, this is the spelling, okay? I was actually focusing on the schwa sound. And so the focus was on phonology, and through teaching pronunciation, you touch on spelling,
Yeah.
but I don't name it. I don't label it as such. So it's not explicit.
But you still do it though. You still do it. I don't need to say to students, okay, now here comes, welcome to the spelling segment of the lesson, because they know it's just going to come in every time a new word comes up. We're going to start to look at, okay, so how do you say that word and how do you write it? And we always say, okay, so this is how we say it, this is how we write it. So they might know, okay, here's a silent letter. I need to remember that I need to write it, but I need to remember that I don't say it. I think what you're doing there, with that really good example of the OUS suffix, is really what you're doing is you're increasing the level of letter to sound correspondence for the students, because they need to realize that actually when you see that combination of letters, it's actually fairly regular. If you see OUS at the end of the word, it's going to be a schwa. It's going to be a schwa sound. But that's really useful, because if they learn, okay, so the word, let's say if you see the word famous, they've learned famous. And then they see the word dangerous and they're going to say dangerous. You're like, that's a missed opportunity. So actually, you're just showing them, look, here's a pattern. So I think it's, again, the idea of, yes, look, spelling can be a bit irregular, but let's look at what's regular. There are loads of different patterns, loads of regular aspects to spelling. I think that's a lot more productive, a lot more, kind of proactive than to say, spelling, it's so tricky. Let's look at all those irregular words. It's a lot more regular than we think. And I think if you show them that bit of pattern, you're highlighting the sound to the letter to the sound.
So, I'm listening to you thinking, so really and truly, we don't really need to change that much as teachers. All we need is a better, a greater awareness of the fact. So it's
that's exactly what I just wrote here.
It's not like great minds. That's what it is. So it's not like, I need to learn, I need to do a course, a teacher training course on how to teach spelling, right? It's about now, whatever you do in the classroom, in particular, when you teach sounds and, phonology, then make this link to spelling more explicit, be aware of it as a teacher. And that way you will make your students more aware of the link between the two.
I completely agree. Gabby, I think especially if you're teaching a general English class, I think just being more aware of when you're doing it and being more aware of why. So why I'm actually highlighting that particular aspect of the sound and, the spelling correspondence.
My favorite question, why?
Yes. However, I'm also thinking, and again, this is it really depends on people's own teaching contexts. Some of the classes, in some of my class, and I think it's something you've mentioned as well, it's really about level. Some of my students are very fluent. They're really, really fluent, but they've never learned to write, right? So I'm dealing with people who would be, in terms of speaking fluency, they'll be not far from B2. Upper intermediate, very confident, really good pronunciation. But, if I show them the letter B, they won't be able to tell me what it is. But they won't be able to tell me the name of the letter, but they also won't be able to tell me the sound it's supposed to make. So for those students, sometimes it just has to be very explicit spelling teaching. And it's really about, you think, oh my goodness, where do I start from? The very first time I had to teach the student, he was a university professor, right? Who was, I think his first language was Arabic, incredibly intelligent, but he was like, look, I need to learn this and I need to learn it quick, right? And I was thinking, oh my God, where do I start? And this is when I just thought, I need a teacher training course right now. And I think sometimes if the teaching has to be so explicit, I think it's when extra CPD really comes in handy, because at times you need to know where to start from. And I just thought, well, we're just going to have to start from each sound. Now, what I've noticed now in a lot of schools, when the kids learn to write, they go from the letter to the sound. So they'll go, oh, this is the letter A, I tend to go from the sound to the letters. So the way I started was I started from the phonemic script, because we've got one in every class. This is why I started from the phonemic script, because that's what I had in my classroom. And I said, okay, so let's look at that sound. It was the short I, the short vowel sound I. Like, okay. So when you hear the sound I, can you think of any words that have the sound I? So we come up with fish and ship. So usually when you hear the sound I, how do you write it? And we looked at the, the most common ways of writing common sounds.
Mm-hmm. How did you come up with this idea to actually start with the sound and then kind of translate it into a letter, not the other way around?
Because I found that a lot of my students had fairly good listening skills. Their comprehension was quite good. Again, people who would be quite fluent, but people who were just not particularly literate in English. But I thought, well, let's start from their strength. Their listening is their strength. Those people could hear the difference between the and the and the And I thought, well, let's start from their strength, as opposed to let's start from their weak point. They don't know what the letters are, right? And they get overwhelmed. But if we start from something they're good at and say, okay, so you know that sound, you can recognize it. Now let's look, how do you write it? So we looked at the common spellings first. Can I just say, do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. English file, I think, is really good for this. The phonemic section at the back is brilliant.
The only course book I really like.
Right? Because again, it shows you each sound, common spellings, more unusual spellings. So I left the more unusual spellings till a bit later, till the students were a bit more confident. But it was just for students to go, oh, okay, so when I hear that sound, that's usually how I write it. Now, when it came to the long E sound, I was like, well, there are several common spellings. It can be EE, EA. Okay, well, it's going to be one or the other, But so this is how I started. But this it might be one situation where you think, I actually need to know how to get started. I think in general English, I think we do it. We maybe don't do it overly explicitly. We maybe don't realize how much we teach spelling, but I think we do. But it's just, if you find yourself, if anybody out there, if you guys find yourself in a situation where your students really need help with this because it's hindering their progress. I mean, a lot of my students, the mixed levels are just incredible. How do you place those students? Do you place them with the beginners because in terms of reading they're A1? Or do you place them with the upper intermediate because in terms of spoken fluency, they're nearly B2?
Yeah,
it's hard.
Yeah, it is. And also what came to my mind just now is that very often students actually, they are very resentful of the fact that we as teachers penalize them for spelling errors when all they want is to become fluent in oral communication, right? So they couldn't care less about whether it was supposed to be A, not E, yet we penalize them for this. So how do you feel about this? And there are students like that, and believe me, my niece is one of them. She just when I try to kind of sensitize her to the fact that it's also important because she will have to take English tests, she just says, oh, you old, you don't know what young people want. So
okay. But is her spelling an issue? Or is it mostly fine?
Yeah, well, it's a big issue, and because she couldn't care less about it, she says she's dyslexic, even though she's not. So she just wants me off her back.
Is it also because maybe it seems like this massive hurdle? Because again, I think a lot of my students, they've got it in their head. Do you know what? Spelling, don't even go there. I think a lot of my students, it's not about being defeatist, but a lot of my students just think, do you know what? It's just that thing. I'll never be good at it, right? I'm going to be able to speak in English. I'm going to be able to, to understand people and have a great conversation. I'm just never going to be a great speller. Oh, well. In my experience, though, is that students make progress really quite quickly. I think once students actually see the strategies and see how they work, most people make progress really quickly. It's really motivating. So it's maybe the idea of, look, learning, becoming a better speller, it's not what you think. It's actually quite straightforward. It just takes really regular practice. It does take regular practice, but it's not all doom and gloom far from it. And, you know, early on, somebody mentioned, you know, you mentioned, Gabby, you know, the idea of running dictations, learning, becoming a better speller doesn't have to be just sitting on your own writing words 10 times. I think the idea is, you know, learn to spell the word that means something to you, right? And that's why I think we talked about this a bit before, Gabby, the idea of phonics. Right. And I had to look at some of the phonics books that are used in school, and I was like, I should maybe use those books for my literacy students. And I thought, do you know what? Yes and no, right? The first book was like, you know, sat, pat, sap. And I thought, but do you know what? Sap is a good word, but it's not top of my priority list. I'm sorry. You know, if my student knows how to spell the word tree, I'll be happy. Sap will come later. The sap of the tree, you know, it's a much higher level. So I think for me, I wouldn't mind teaching a student how to spell a higher level word if it's what they read, a word that means something to them. Right? So I'll give you an example. I've got this student, and he's a really interesting character, 15 years old, extremely intelligent, very fluent, just again, no understanding of how the letters work. And he was saying to me the other day, you know, I really believe in education. I just love education. I love learning. I said, well, how do you spell education? Is that a word that means something to you? Do you want to learn how to spell education? It's too long. That word's too long. I was like, no. So we looked at educat, like education, educator, educate, educated, educational. And he just went, what? You mean like it's the same? Like, yeah, the root of the word is not going to change. And, you know, I think if the word means something to you, and then you're showing a strategy that's going to really help you improve your spelling, like, actually, do you know, I'll get there. You know, so maybe with your niece idea, you know, learning to become a better speller is maybe not what you think it is. It's not so bleak.
But you know, Sophie, my niece would also say what Maria has just put in the chat box. My niece would also say, why do I need to remember things? Why should I clutter my brain with things that I don't need to remember because I have
brilliant. I really love this, Maria. That's a really, really good point. I'm just rereading it really quickly. Yeah. And if you get the chance there, I'm going to put this in the chat. There's a really interesting TED talk by a linguist called what is his name? John Mac. Oh, I'm going to misspell his name. I've got a feeling. How ironic. She couldn't spell the name of the guy. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
but it's about texting. I think the TED talk is called "Is Texting Killing Spelling?" And he makes this really good point. He says, look, texting is not writing. The way he describes it is texting is fingered speech. Because obviously we write in a text the way we speak. We just happen to use the mechanics of writing, but it's a different process. When we write, really as proper form of writing, we think about it, we take time, we edit. When we send a text message, there's no editing involved, it's just send. She said you can't really compare. And one thing I think is really useful in the classroom is to do both. So, okay, let's practice our text message because it's a form of communication. Is it speaking? Is it writing? I think it's really between the two. So at times I just use paper, but you know, I've got those kind of blank mobile phone templates, right? iPhone, you know, iPhone 3, I think it is. And I get students to write text messages and then they crunch them up and they send them to each other. They open them and then they write the response in the back. So that's our texting practice. It's really to practice functional language. Right? But I tell them, look, if you make a spelling mistake for this, is that okay? Yeah, it's just a text message. We're not practicing our writing. We're practicing our texting. It's something else. It's an extra skill. But it's still good for the confidence of even just forming letters. So for, you know, very weak students, I still think it's valuable practice even just for letter formation.
Say it again. What do you do exactly? You have a template, because I love this idea. And
it's so much fun. So it's like a kind of, you know, I just Googled, you know, blank mobile phone and then copied and pasted it onto Microsoft Word document. So then each student gets maybe like 3 or 4 blank mobile phones. And let's say if you're practicing the functional language of invitations, right? So maybe they'll have 4 and they have to send one text message saying, hey, fancy going for coffee later on, and then they crunch up the piece of paper and they send it.
It's absolutely brilliant, because what they do, they are texting, but without the use of their fingers and phones.
But they're still using the pen. They're still using, you know, they're still practicing writing from left to right. They're still practicing writing on a line. They're still practicing, you know, leaving spaces between each word, you know, but it doesn't feel like it. The pressure is completely different, because it doesn't feel like writing, you know, like, you know, you're writing an essay or a paragraph.
I absolutely love it, and it's a beautiful activity for kids when you run summer camps, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant.
I mean, I use it with adults as well, but so I think texting for me, I wouldn't worry too much about poor spelling in texting, as long as you still deal with spelling when it comes to writing practice and learning new words. So it's not, I'm saying it doesn't matter at all, but I think texting is something separate. It's like a real hybrid of speaking and writing, isn't it?
Yep.
But there was just something else that came up as well earlier on. You mentioned tests, Gabby, and I forgot to mention this.
Oh yeah, I did ask whether testing spelling, like running tests, short tests, just to focus on spelling.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I think most of what I've read anyway, most studies seem to say that doesn't really work, right? But I still do them every week, right? Why? And it's something that I've really had to think about it. And I think it's really about students' beliefs and expectations. And you know, whenever you're teaching students, it's really, you know, sometimes, you know, let's say if they keep asking me for a list, oh, teacher, I want a list of words with O-U-G-H, that I won't compromise with. And I'll tell them why. I said, no, you're going to make your own. And this is why I think it's so much better that you make your own, Grant. But at times I find that I can't always be pushing my agenda, right? And one of the things that most of my students believe is good for them, and one thing they expect to do in the classroom, is spelling tests, right? So I do them. And I don't really think it helps that much, but in their head, it does. And I think it's maybe a bit of a placebo.
Yeah, actually, you know, now again, I'm listening to you thinking, I actually do the same, but I don't do it as a test. What I do is at the end of each lesson, the last 5 minutes, I put students into groups and I get them to just list all the words from the lesson that they can still remember, any words, okay?
Brilliant.
New words or old words, and it's a competition. So they just have to, they just, you know, write all they remember.
But they have to write them.
Yeah, on the whiteboard, okay?
Brilliant.
And then we just cross-check, and whoever, you know, has more words, that's the winning.
And I think it's good because it's kind of hot recall. Yeah. I think maybe at the end of the week, I mean, look, I think kids in schools do them every week. You know, same thing with dictation for, you know, testing, spelling. For me, as long as it's meaningful, as long as the words you teach are meaningful, Grant, test them, don't test them. If your students expect it, if they think it's what a good teacher does and it's how a student learns, I'll give it to them.
Yeah, well, it's an opportunity really for you to again to help them notice, because even with this task that, you know, I run, I you know, it's an opportunity for me to highlight things that they were not aware of, like, you know, they know the word but they don't know the spelling, right? Because clearly they didn't get it right.
Brilliant.
So yeah, so it's
and I think then, so, you know, one thing I've noticed now, I don't ask the students, why do you think you got that wrong? You know, why do you think you forgot that letter? Why do you, you know, because then it's really for them to stop and think, oh, right, yes, that's something I always do. I always forget this.
Yeah.
No, another thing I've noticed as well, a lot of my students say, teacher, how do you spell? And now my default answer is, how do you think? Try it first. So I don't give away any more spellings until they've tried it, because not with all, far from, but with some of my students, 9 times out of 10, they're right. And it's really just to do with confidence. And by now they're like, actually, you know, I think I'm better at spelling than I used to think.
Yeah.
You know, my spelling is not as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
But now, just not to give away as much, and really to just leave it on them and say, well, can anybody help? What do you think?
Yeah.
You know?
Brilliant. So I can see that we are kind of drawing to an end. It's 2 minutes left, but I I don't want to be asking any more questions. I have loads of questions, okay? And I really, but I wonder if perhaps someone would like to comment. It's last call. So if there are any takers, if someone wants to say something, then...
If not before, I just have to show you this. Is it mirrored? I don't know if you can really see. Teaching Spelling by Joanna Sterling.
Mhm.
It's, you know, Christmas, so you're somebody's birthday soon. Oh, do you know, it's brilliant because I don't know if she's an academic. I know she's a teacher, but that book made sense to me. Some of the books I go, you know, some books are just a bit too technical. That book I thought was brilliant, and it's packed full with different activities.
Mhm.
It's so practical. The first part is really, you know, helping us as teachers to really get our head around how spelling works,
Mhm.
why it is the way it is, and then giving us activities to help students with different kinds of difficulties. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant book.
Before you go, Sophie, I have one more question. Sorry, I just
Yes.
remembered. I really want to ask. Low level and high level
Oh,
students.
yes.
So when you think about how much emphasis you put on spelling, you know, at low levels and high levels.
Do you know what? I really don't think it is that connected to level. I think it's connected to whoever needs it, if I'm honest. So if you have complete beginners who really can't read or write, then you start from scratch. But at the same time, if you have an advanced student who's really struggling with spelling, maybe because they're dyslexic or odd, then you really have to help them with it as well. So to me, it's a bit like phonology. You teach phonology, whether it's beginners or proficiency students. I think spelling's the same. I think it really goes across the whole range of levels. We teach it to whoever needs it.
Mm.
And a lot of the time you find that, you know, our own students are mixed levels anyway. So again, they might be advanced of the range of lexis. When it comes to spelling, their spelling accuracy could be a much lower level. Whoever needs it across the board.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody's ever too advanced to work on spelling. Likewise, you know, I do drilling with advanced students.
Oh, me too.
To look at connected speech, or, you know, so I feel I think there are loads of parallels for me between, there might be more parallels between teaching spelling and teaching pronunciation than reading and spelling. But I find that I teach it across the board, all levels.